All right, everyone, this is Dr. Hill, and it is Aorist week. We are so pumped up. We are going to be learning the aorist tense. And so actually we will be learning the aorist tense in the present, or the aorist tense in the active in the middle. Next week we'll be doing the aorist passive, but it's Aorist week. Now, Aorist week is a big week because there are a lot, of all the tenses in the New Testament, the aorist is probably represented the most. We're going to see the most percentage of verbs in the New Testament are going to have an aorist tense stem. So it pays to pay attention this week. We are going to be covering two different chapters this week, and that is, we'll be talking about the first aorist and what is called the second aorist. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. This is chapter 23. And the second aorist, ironically, is chapter 22. It's the first one. So before we do any of this, let's just talk briefly about the aorist tense. If you have your book, I'm just going to walk through a little bit about, in chapter 22 is where we're going to start. And the reason why I'm doing it off this, and I will walk through each chapter on the computer in other videos, but this is an overview, and I want to just give you a little bit of a background because I'm going to kind of skip back and forth between the two chapters. Mounts will start with the second aorist and then move back to the first aorist. But what I want to kind of walk through both at a little bit at the same time, but to give an overview to start. So we're in chapter 22, and in chapter 22.1 it just talks about in English how in English we form the past tense in a couple of ways. That there can be in English, like if I want to go from I study to, we would say then, I studied, right? And we would add this ed on the end. And the vast majority of verbs in English, if we want to go to past tense, we add an ed on the end. But sometimes we have verbs that if we go from sit, how do we say sit? We don't say he sitted, we say he sat. It's a different way. It doesn't add an ed, it actually changes the stem. And so that's really a little bit what we're talking about here with the aorist tense and how they're formed. So we're not, there's some similarities, but they are not exactly the same. So hang with me on this, okay? So the very first thing that we need to understand is that the aorist tense primarily is talking about past time. And we've already encountered a tense that deals with past time, and that's the imperfect. The imperfect deals with past time with a continuous aspect. The aorist tense will deal with past time with what they call a undefined aspect. What does undefined mean? It means it's undefined, but typically what it means is that, maybe a good way to put it is that it is simple completion. Okay? And basically what I just did, simple completion, so if we talk about back to our verbs, study, he was studying, imperfect. Aorist is he studied. Simple completion. Sit, he was sitting, imperfect. He sat, undefined aspect, that's simple completion. And so whenever you come across an aorist tense in the indicative, we are going to translate it past time, simple completion. Okay, that's basically how we're going to work with the aorist. There might be some exceptions to that rule, but that's the basic idea. Okay, so let me just talk through, and that's basically what I just walked through. I just walked through 22.1, 22.2, and 22.3 in Mounce's textbook. Okay. Now, 22.4 is basically this, the idea of there are two ways of forming the aorist tense. Now, every verb that we learn will use either one or the other way of forming the aorist. You won't have one verb that uses two different ways of doing it, generally speaking. It will be one or the other. And here's just the basic idea. For the first aorist, what will happen is you will take a verb. We're going to take luo as an example, okay? And we will walk through this. Because we're using past time, we augment, right? And then the first aorist will use what is called a sigma alpha tense formative. So we've got an augment, we've got an aorist stem, and then we have a tense formative, and that's a saw. The other thing that we're going to find is that we're going to use secondary active or secondary endings, okay? Because we've got an augment, right? Then we use secondary endings. There's a little bit of a difference here with saw. What we're going to see is that the first singular is going to be saw, and then as we move down, second singular, third singular, first, second, third, plural, plural, plural. What we're going to see is that the ending is going to be saw, sauce, se, and then samen, sate, and then san. So these are secondary endings here. So it's blank, sigma, blank, sauce, sauce, sen, samen, sate, san. There's no connecting vowel here because you have that alpha on the end of the tense formative. So that's a little bit different, and we'll walk through it in the book when we work through our first aorist. But that's one way of forming the aorist, okay? That's the first aorist, and that's going to be chapter 23, and we're going to start with chapter 23, quite honestly, because I think it's a little easier to do this, starting with chapter 23. And then we're going to go back to the second aorist, which is chapter 22, and so we're jumping back and forth, okay? And second aorists do not form using a tense formative. What you get, we're going to use, in their example, they use the verb lambano. And for lambano uses the aorist stem of lambano is lab. And this gives us really our the first lesson in second aorists. Second aorists form the aorist not by adding a tense formative, but by changing the stem. Okay, let me say that again. Second aorists do not form the aorist by using a tense formative, but rather by changing the stem of the word. So lambano that's the present tense stem, right? And that's how we memorize the verb. Lambano, the aorist stem is lab. So the way this is going to work is we're going to add our augment, and then we're going to add, so we've got augment, we've got our aorist stem, no tense formative, we get our connecting vowel, and then we have our secondary endings, which is on. And again, so elaban, say elaban. So, and those secondary endings are the same secondary endings we learned with the imperfect, and so we get on, s, e, amen, eta, on. Okay? Same thing we had before. On, s, n, amen, eta, on, still have the connecting vowel. And so elaban, elabes, elabe, or elaben, elabamen, elabete, elaban. And again, first singular, third plural are identical. That's not a problem we have over here in the first aorist. Sa and san, those are different. But that is the second aorist. So the takeaway, first aorists are formed using a tense formative, and they generally keep the present tense stem. Or I should say the stem, what you memorize them as, they're going to be a little bit more easily identified. Second aorists will form by changing the stem and using the aorist tense stem with no tense formative, just our secondary endings connecting vowel. Both of them augment because they are both about past time and undefined aspect. So that is a basic introduction to the aorist tense in Greek. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to end this video, and then we're going to start in with chapter 23 and walk through that chapter and learn about how we form this and kind of hit some of the higher points of that. And then we're going to do another video on chapter 22 where we're going to walk through how the second aorists are formed. And then we're going to do the vocab for each chapter, and we're going to look at past words as well and how they play out in terms of how they form the aorist, whether are the past verbs that we've learned form the aorist as first aorists or if they form the aorist as second aorists, okay? So there's a few more videos to come, but this was a basic introduction to the aorist tense. It's Aorist Week, everybody. We're very pumped up, and I hope you are as well. So let's go on to the next video.